Thank you, Roxy. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank the sponsors, the Community Foundation, and all the other wonderful sponsors who have made our gathering here together possible. And what I'd like to do is first find out a little bit about you. How many of you that are here are actually parents of children or adolescents or even grown kids? Let's just see. So it's basically everyone, and up there, let's see, all right, great. Anyone here in the role of child or adolescent, just so I can see? I mean, directly? No, okay, all right. All right, so we're gonna talk about you tonight. So if there were adolescents here or younger kids, this would be perfectly appropriate also for them. Because how many of you once were an adolescent or a child? Raise your hand. Okay, so we all have this shared in common. So what I'm going to do in this time we have together is give you a deep dive into a way of thinking about parenting that is also useful if you're in the role of being an educator. How many educators do we have in the room as well? Raise your hand really high. Let's hear it for our educators, by the way. Such an important role. We also have some clinicians. Any clinicians in the room who work to help our kids and adolescents grow? Let's hear it for our clinicians. Very good. And there are so many ways we can help people grow. So the idea is, what can we understand about the experience of adults supporting children's development, adolescents' development? What can we understand from science? So what I'm going to present to you is a kind of an overview. We have this exciting moment where when I came here to do the sound check, sitting on the podium was a book I had never seen, and it was my next book. And somehow Minta had gotten it from 40 Carats, and there it was sitting there. I don't know, who has it? I don't know, it's probably disappeared. Oh, it's up there. So this is a very exciting moment because I've actually never held this book before. And so we're going to talk about lots of things, but some of the things we'll talk about is in this book called The Yes Brain. Isn't that a cool cover? It's a very simple thing. It could have been orange for 40 carats. That would have been good. Yellow carats. So we're going to talk about a lot of the things that are summarized, not just in this book, but I'll just give you an overview of the field I work in, which is called interpersonal neurobiology. And what we do is we combine all the different sciences together. So this morning for the clinicians, we did an overview of interpersonal neurobiology, and we talked about how you can apply findings from the field of anthropology to study culture, or sociology to study groups, or linguistics to study language, or psychology, or psychiatry, or biology, or chemistry, even physics and math you can bring into one framework, and that framework is called interpersonal neurobiology. So for our clinicians, we have over 50 textbooks that I've overseen the publication of through a professional series. And for parenting, this is now the 5th parenting book that I've written, where they're all about applying interpersonal neurobiology for parents to use or for educators to use. And you're going to hear this, so for those of you who like science, there's the professional series you can turn to, or a book called The Developing Mind. For those of you who just want to hear the take-home messages, that's what I'm going to focus on. But some people say, well, what's the science behind all this? And that's not what tonight's talk is about. Tonight's talk is about learning the basics of science so that you can see what a scientifically informed approach to parenting would be. Does that make sense? And what I'm going to try to do is point out the take-home messages that you can use maybe tonight when you get home. Hopefully your kids will be asleep if it's well, we'll see what time we finish, but they'll be asleep, but tomorrow for sure when they're awake. And what we're going to do to start out with in this discussion is point to 2 fundamental things that we're going to be discussing over and over and over again. One is relationships. They're underemphasized in a lot of what you hear, but they're the foundation for how children develop. Relationships, and we're going to have to define what those are. The second thing we're going to talk about is the brain in your head, which is connected to your whole body. So we could just as easily talk about the whole body, but we're going to focus on the brain. Now, a relationship is basically a connection we have with our kids or our adolescents. So when I use the word kid or child, this person could be like, my oldest is now turning 28 in a couple of days. He's still my kid, but he's 28 and much taller than I am, and also a lot more knowledgeable about the world than I am. So he's still my kid. And for those of us who have adult kids, they're still your kid. But the idea is, how do we support development for kids who are in the growing period, which is from 0 to at least 24? The brain is growing and growing and growing. And so we're going to talk about how your relationship shapes the development of the brain in the head, and what you can do as a teacher, for example, but especially as a parent, to help this brain develop in an optimal way. Now, the folks from 40 Carrots came in before you all arrived, and they did this incredible gesture of love for you. They took a model of the brain, and they taped it to the bottom of your chair. So if you reach under your chair, this is something you can take home with you. Reach under there, see if you can go around the gum that's stuck under there, and pull your arm out, and you'll see attached to your arm is a hand. And this, 40 Carrots people tell me this is your handout for tonight. And my daughter says, never say it's a handy model of the brain, but it is. If you take your thumb and bend your thumb in the middle, everyone find it under there? And you can take this home with you. You bend the thumb over the middle and you put your fingers over the top. This would be the orientation of this model of the brain in your head. So the forehead would be right in front of your knuckles. The top of the head would be in top here. The back of the head would be the back of the hand. And your body would be represented where your arm is. And basically your wrist represents your spinal cord that is bringing all sorts of stuff up from the body, up into the head brain. And then if you lift up your fingers, try this out because you're going to be going deep into brain anatomy tonight, and lift up your thumb, then the first part of the brain we're going to talk about is the brain stem that's here in your palm. The second part, if you put your thumb back over, that's your limbic area. You'd have two thumbs to be a perfect model, but most of us just have one thumb. And so that's your limbic area, the second area. And the third area we're going to talk about, if you bend your fingers back over, is the cortex, the outer bark of the brain. Now, the reason for you as a parent to know about the brain is the following simple statement. How you get your brains of your kids to fire off, which I'm going to teach you how to do tonight, will determine, in part, how that brain grows. And there's a simple little rhyming thing which says, where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So the way you can have your child focus attention, where attention goes, gets the brain to get activated. That's neural firing is the word we use. Neural firing flows, and then neural connection grows. So we know now that experience involves how energy is flowing through the brain and actually gets the genes to turn on. And when genes turn on, they allow the firing neurons to strengthen their connections with each other by allowing proteins to be produced and the connections among neurons called synapses to grow. So the key thing for the parenting issue here is that how you stream energy and information flow through your child's brain will help determine, in part, not totally, because genes also just on their own determine how the brain grows, but in part, those experiences that you help create will help shape the structural growth of this child's brain. Isn't that amazing? Relationships that you have shape the structure of your child's brain. So the reason to know about a little bit about brain structure is because what you do can make a difference. Now, that's the first take-home message, that parenting really matters. And we can teach parents and especially if it's ourselves, we can teach ourselves what we can do to actually make a difference. So that's the first take-home message, is that your relationship will change the structure of the brain of this child you have. Now, what we're going to do in this hour and a half we have together is we are going to walk deeply through how the brain develops from conception all the way to the mid-20s. Because how many of you have adolescents who are under your care? Raise your hand really high. So that's a good percentage of people. So this will be good for you, and then for those of you who have younger kids, they will, believe me, become an adolescent sooner than you think. And I love the phrase, the days are long, but the years are really short. You know, and a given day can be really, really hard. But then before you know it, your kid is going and leaving the house, and you get so sad. And even before they leave the house, they become an adolescent. And they tell you things like, I'm not going to the movie with you, Dad. You know, which is what then I knew my adolescent boy was an adolescent, because I said, oh, there's this cool movie. He goes, yeah, it's really cool. I said, yeah, it's playing tonight. He goes, I know. I said, you want to go? He goes, yeah, but not with you. I felt so bad. So I took his sister to a movie. Who's younger. She's younger than he is. Didn't turn out so well. If you read the Mindsight book, it turned into a big fight called the Crepes of Wrath. Anyway, so that's the second take-home point, actually. First take-home point is your relationship can shape your child's brain. Second take-home point is there is no such thing as perfect parenting. So if any of you have read my book with Mary Hartzell called Parenting from the Inside Out, or Brainstorm, or the books I've written with Tina Bryson, like Whole Brain Child or No Drama Discipline, or this book, Yes Brain, we always put in all those books, I always put in how I've goofed up as a parent. And my kids are like astonished that I do this. In fact, I always have them read it, and I said, you know, is this accurate? They go, yeah, it's accurate, but like, what is wrong with you that you're telling the world what a jerk you are? You know? And I said, that's exactly the point. There's no such thing as perfect parenting. So this is, you got to tell me, someone keep track of the numbers. This is message number 3. I guess we said no such thing as perfect parenting. Here's the issue. The most important thing about parenting is repair. The reason I put in what a jerk I can be in my behavior is that you can always become aware that you were just acting like a jerk, and you can make a repair. That there is no such thing as perfect parenting, that it's all about relationships, and relationships are not about perfection, they're about repairing so that you have a direction in which you're trying to go. And there's some absolutely cool new research, we won't get into the details of it, but that basically shows the way this brain is structured, the way we grow, is to figure out what's going on with another person's intention. Where's their attention and what's in their awareness? And so what that means is that your child is always looking to you to see, what were you meaning by screaming at me? You know, and if you come back and apologize, you said, you know, I was, you know, flipping my lid, it just didn't go the way I wanted to. Let's rewind and do it again, because what I did was not right. You're role modeling for them exactly how you can recognize that what it means when you goof up. It means one thing. It means you're human. And when you come with a repair, it means everything. Okay. So we're going to look at this brain and figure out, well, what is the essential way you get this brain to grow well, and what does that even mean to grow well, so you can know what that means. Okay. So this brain, I don't want to scare anyone, but actually going back to conception, it starts out as a sperm and an egg. You guys know that. I hope I'm not shocking anyone here. But you start out as a sperm and egg, which is actually quite remarkable, because of all the sperm and all the eggs that could have gotten together, one pair of those got together, and they made your amazing child. That is like a phenomenal creation of something actual from all the possibles that were there, which is something we talked about this morning in a different way. But that is an absolutely amazing act of magnificence. And I know the days are long, but listen, being a parent, while it's the hardest job in the world, it is the most amazing opportunity in the world to support someone you love like mad growing into this world. I mean, what other thing would you want to be doing but actually supporting someone you love's growth? And that's what we get to do. So the sperm and egg get together. Now, an amazing thing happens soon when that two cells become one, is that one becomes two, and then four, and then eight, right? And 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, et cetera, et cetera. It gets so big. And suddenly this glob of cells called the conceptus has an amazing moment that we should just recognize, where there's what's called a differentiation, that the cells on the outside of this big clump of cells, because they're on the outside, they're different from the cells on the inside. They're just different. And that becomes one of the most important principles we're going to talk about tonight. Differentiation. Things becoming different. So differentiation, that's what it means, things becoming different. So what's really amazing is if you do a different kind of hand model, make your hands like this where the fingers are touching each other at the fingertips. So this is this clump of cells, okay? And now I want you to take your fingernails and push them inward to the inside of that group of cells. So your first knuckles kiss, and then bring it so your second knuckles kiss. And you see where those fingernails got to? That becomes what's called the neural tube, right? That's going to become your spinal cord. And at the end of that spinal cord is going to become the brain. And the reason I'm taking the time to talk about embryology like this is because there's a very important fourth take-home message, which is this. See, let's go backwards. Put it back together. And now let's make it invaginate again. It goes inward and becomes this inner neural tube. Now back it up, back it up, back it up. So what that outer layer is called, it's called the ectoderm, the skin. So what this shows you is that the nervous system, including your brain, is actually a bunch of fancy skin cells. Now, the reason we're bringing that up is because what's the role of the skin? It's to protect you, sure. And it's the interface between the inside of your body and the outside of your body, right? Your skin is that interface. The nervous system is exactly that. The nervous system is all about interfacing the inner and the outer. And that's a very important issue. Because in parenting, we often forget that what we're trying to do is continue that role of the brain to be balancing the inner and the outer, differentiating inner and outer. So, for example, in schools, what happens a lot is teachers forget that students have an inner experience. They feel something in their gut. They feel something in their heart. They feel something just in their subjective experience. Instead, they're very, very busy trying to do the best they can, and they're told, teach skills, teach skills, teach skills. So they teach math and history and all these things they teach. But the inner life of the child becomes invisible. And the brain does not thrive so well when all it has is what's called physical sight, just seeing the physical world. It needs something called mind sight. It needs to sense the inner world that you feel in your gut, in your heart. Literally, you have a brain, by the way, around your heart, and you have a brain around your gut. So even though I'll use the word brain, I'm always talking about the head brain, unless I say heart brain and gut brain. And so when children are just focusing on the outside world, or we as parents only focus on their behavior, and we don't look at their inner world, let's just call that for now the mind. When you don't look at the mind of your child beneath the child's behavior, and you just react to their behavior, you're mad at their behavior, but you're not curious about what they were feeling or thinking or what their intention was. Children who grow up in homes like that grow up very differently. Their brain needs to have someone outside of themselves help guide them to explore the inner world. So let's just call that mind sight. So from the very beginning, the brain is wanting to balance the inner and the outer. But in our modern society, especially with all these smartphones and computers and video games, we're focused outward, outward, outward. But the brain is supposed to balance both. So it doesn't become balanced anymore. It's more focusing on the outer world. So we'll come back to that soon. All right, so this brain is now developing. And now we come back to the hand model of the brain. The first part of the brain to develop is this brain stem. So let's lift up our fingers lift up our thumb. Let's look at the palm area. So this brainstem, when the baby's in the womb, is going to develop pretty much fully before the baby comes out. Now, what does the brainstem do? The brainstem is so close to the body, it's regulating respiration and heart function. It's regulating your intestines. It's also involved in the fight, flight, freeze, and faint response when you're threatened. And we'll come back to that very soon. But the brainstem is very, very basic. Now, in evolutionary terms, it's about 300 million years old. So that's a very ancient part of the brain. So it's old in both senses. It's old in the sense that it's 300 million years old reptilian brain, but it's old also in the sense that it developed fully in utero. Now, the next part of the brain is the limbic area, our left and right thumbs, if we had two thumbs. Right there, if you put your thumb over, this is the area that started developing about 200 million years ago. So it's a newer part of the brain, but 200 million years old is pretty new compared to 300 million years. But when the baby is born, it's about halfway developed. And what that means is when the baby comes out of the womb, genes, your information in your DNA, will continue to tell these neurons how to grow and grow the structure of the brain. But now, once you're out of the womb, one of the bigger influences becomes experience. So here again, we're going to see how two forces continue to interact. How many of you have more than one child? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you would say, even though you're kind of parenting them in a similar way, they're very different people? Raise your hand. Yeah. And that, what we call that is we call that temperament. So temperament is a neural propensity, like how you respond to stimuli, or how you respond to novelty, or, are you a moody kind of kid, or are you pretty stable, or how's the rhythm of your energy levels? Are you outgoing, or ingoing? All these things are what are called temperament, and we believe they're in large part shaped by your genes or random things that happen, but the point of them is they're innate. They are not shaped by experience. That's the general belief. So that's called temperament. What the research suggests is that how you as a parent allow your child to have the temperament he or she has and respect that, know that, let it be differentiated is how you would say it in IPNB terms, interpersonal neurobiology terms. You would say you are differentiating so that, let's say I have a son and I really want my son to be this outgoing, really aggressive football-playing guy, but he's kind of inward. He really likes to draw and do music. And he's kind of, laid back and hanging loose and doesn't like football or soccer or anything like that. Now, what the studies show, if I make this kid do what I expect him to do and be, he will suffer. But if I tune into who he is and let him become the best he that he is, he will thrive. That's what we mean by differentiation. I take my expectations of who my child is, and I realize my expectations for be like this are very different from who he is. So he can do absolutely fine if I respect who he is. And a lot of the problems I've seen as a child psychiatrist is when parents refuse to do that. They're so convinced that their expectation is the right way to do things, and their child absolutely suffers. And their relationship suffers, and as a child grows into adolescence, it's a nightmare. Then it gets really bad. So what this tells us is that genes are very important, and this baby is just coming out of the womb. We got this baby as a newborn, and you probably know this. The first 24 hours, you can pretty much feel the temperament of this kid, can't you? You go, whoa, my daughter's really different from my son. Wow, this is going to be something. And they're still very different, so temperament is very important. But then you have experience that interfaces with temperament, and that leads to what's called personality. And I don't mean like a bubbly personality. I mean, what's called personality is a combination of experience plus temperament. So personality is very different from temperament. Temperament may not be able to be changed that much, actually, but the way you relate to your own temperament, that can be changed, and that's called personality. So you can show in all sorts of research ways that a tendency for a person to be agreeable or not, or to be someone who's moody or not, these are things that actually are quite changeable, believe it or not. They really are, and they're really about self-reflection and about relationships and all sorts of things. People think they're fixed, but they're actually quite changeable. Amazingly. Temperament, not so changeable, but the process of the larger personality you come to is actually quite changeable. If that wasn't the case, you would show that in research that people can't change, but they actually can. Okay, and the reason for that change is something called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the term for how experience changes the structure of the brain. Neuroplasticity is your friend as a parent, because you can't change the genes you gave your child unless you rewind and change your partner with whom you match up your sperm and egg. But assuming you can't go backwards in time with a time machine, this is the deal. You picked your partner, you made a baby, that's what they got. So you can fret about that if you want, but there is something you can do about brain structure by changing experience. This is what parents need to know. Now, I know a lot of people freak out when they hear about, oh my God, I got to change my child's brain, blah, blah, blah. So here's what I want to tell you about to just relax your concern about that. The genes in your cells, especially now we're talking about the brain, so the neurons in the head, they have a whole bunch of information, and your baby is going to have what's called experience-expectant brain development. That brain's going to grow fine. You don't have to worry about every little minute, how do I get the neurons to grow? How am I going to get the synapses to grow? No. You got to actually have something called parental presence. Parental presence is something we'll get into in just a few minutes, but this brain will grow naturally with the love that you can allow to be there. Now, let's take the example of this son I have who's an artist and a musician, which is actually true, instead of the football player that I'm imagining I would have wanted him to be. So I wouldn't have parental presence if I keep on saying, that stupid kid, he's the artist, musician guy. I want him to be on the football team. Yeah, come on, let's go watch a football. If I keep on doing that to him, I don't have parental presence. Presence is the idea of dropping into awareness and being receptive and accepting of what is. It's not passive parenting. Not at all. It is super awake parenting, where you are so awake, you're even awake to letting your judgments and expectations relax, so you stop imprisoning your kid in this horrible vault in which you're trying to shove them into being something that they're not. That little kid is saying, go down. So here's the idea of parental presence. As this brain is growing, you're going to optimize brain growth because of neuroplasticity. Your child is going to look at you and see that you love them and you're really interested in them being the best them they can be. And they're going to feel that even if they can't articulate it until they're like 28, like my son just did. And my birthday card, it was so sweet. Oh my God, I should read you this card. Oh, so beautiful. He didn't say it when he was 15, that's for sure. But they get through that period. It takes about 10 years, but it happens. Okay. So now what happens is the limbic area. Let's talk about what this limbic area does. So now you have a one-day-old, right? So the brainstem is fully formed, the limbic area is there, the cortex hardly formed at all. The limbic area has 5 functions I want you to memorize because I'm going to test you on them in about half an hour. So get ready. The limbic area works very closely with the brainstem below it and the body to create emotion. Okay? So one thing the limbic area is involved in is emotion. Very good. Number 2, the limbic area works with the brainstem below it to motivate you, that is, to drive your behavior in certain ways. So the second thing is a motivation. Excellent. Third thing, the limbic area is involved in what's called evaluation or appraising the significance of things. So it's involved in appraisal. What's the third thing the limbic area is involved in? Appraisal, excellent. The fourth thing the limbic area is involved in is basically memory, different kinds of memory. What's involved in? Memory, good. See, your limbic area was involved in that, excellent. And the fifth thing the limbic area is involved in is exactly what we're talking about. It's called attachment. So the fifth thing is attachment, which is the relationship between your kid and you. And I'm trained as an attachment researcher, and what my field and my colleagues have been able to show is that the way you communicate with your child will determine not everything, because temperament is really important in development, but it's going to determine a whole lot about how your child relates to other people and how your child relates to herself. Self-understanding, regulating her emotions, even how she starts negotiating through adolescence is shaped in a huge way by your relationship with your child. And the good news is, this is studied across many cultures. So, of course, there's specific cultural applications. Every culture is different, and there are different families that do it different ways. But there are universal principles of attachment that we're going to talk about. And the limbic area, with its 5 functions, is now going to be the interface between the lower parts of the body and what we're about to talk about the cortex. So now the baby is, a week old, 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, and what's happening is the cortex is starting to get online, and the cortex is basically a map maker. So it makes maps of things. What a map in the brain means is you have a bunch of columns in different regions of the brain. So if I go, bop, 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 I can tell you where in your head brain the cortical columns will be registering that sound. It's in the side area. We know exactly how that energy input of sound goes to your ears, the acoustic 8th cranial nerve, and where it goes. If I wave my hands around like this, we also know exactly where in your brain visual input as photons bouncing off these lights off my body into your eyes. When it gets to your eyes, your optic nerve will send it back into your brain, and we know which cortical columns will be activated. So that's what I mean by mapping, is we know somehow these columns of neurons that communicate with each other, the firing pattern of those cortical columns makes a set of patterns called a map, a neural map. And this is what we don't understand, but we just know where it happens. We don't really know how. Somehow, you hear a sound when that part of the brain is activated in the side temporal areas. Somehow, in ways we don't know how, when the back of the brain is active, you see my hands moving. That's the part we don't know. How do you go from brain firing to mental experience? We don't know. Nobody knows. The closest I ever heard of anyone coming to that was I was going to teach in New York. I got picked up at the airport by a cab driver. He said, "What are you doing?" "I'm here to talk about the brain, the mind, relationships." He goes, "Oh, that's really cool." I said, "Yeah, I guess that's cool." "Yeah, it's cool." He goes, "When I got my second PhD, I was working on the computer program," blah, 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 and he gives me this really interesting analysis about how the brain would create mental experience. I thought it was brilliant. Anyway, but that's what he's doing for his job. He's a cab driver. So what happens when the cortex is growing now is experience is going to drive part of its development. And I'm going to just take a few minutes to give you a very sophisticated brain view of development. And usually I don't talk about this, but I think this will be important for us to put into our discussion. There's something called experience expectant development, and there's something called experience dependent development. And the difference is this: every baby born expects, like any member of our species, expects there to be light and to be able to see. Every baby born expects there to be sound and to be able to hear. So genes encode for the parts of the brain that are going to make maps of hearing and maps for seeing, right? So it expects light to come in. So in pediatrics, we were always worried if the child had an opacity to their lens, right? So they couldn't see clearly, and we didn't catch it early enough, those experience expectant circuits would start to whittle away. So what an experience expectant genetically driven development is it says, I need to answer that phone right now. So that would be an example of an experience dependent. We weren't born to hear phones, but you know that's a phone. That's because you're learning about that is dependent on having that experience. Expectant means you just have those circuits. I think attachment is also an experience expectant development. Babies expect to have what are called the 4 S's of attachment. They're born to be seen, meaning their minds are seen beneath their behavior. They're born to be soothed by you, and they expect that. Appropriately, they expect that. They're born to be safe, meaning you protect them from harm, and you also are not the source of terror. And if you are the source of terror, which some of us do, including myself, you make a repair. If you're screaming and yelling or you come home drunk or whatever you do, you make a repair. There's no such thing as perfect parenting, remember that. So we can terrify our kids, but terror without repair is not a good thing, as you'll see soon. But here's the issue. If you have the experience of being seen, meaning your feelings and thoughts and your mind beneath behavior are cared about and looked for by your parent, if you're soothed, meaning you're distressed, and that experience of connecting with your parent soothes you, and you're safe, meaning you're protected and your parent is not the source of terror, then you develop the 4th S, which is security. So babies are born, like any mammals, needing attachment, but as human mammals, they need these 4 S's. That's experience expectant development. You don't need to worry about that too much. You can just be present. It'll work out okay. That's why I want to try to have you relax. Then there's the other kind of development called experience-dependent development. So if you start screaming at your kid, they didn't expect that to happen. They don't have circuits to deal with you screaming at them. So now they're going to have cortical and limbic reactions to your screaming at them that are called experience-dependent, meaning the growth of those connections in the brain were dependent on them being screamed at. So the good stuff, security and all that, is an experience-expectant thing. That's just going to genetically be forming, and that's cool. You can relax and just love your kid and just be there for them. But if you have a thing going on, like you'll see soon, you flip your lid a lot and you terrify your kid, well, that's going to shape their brain too because they're having that experience. And even though the outside of their body may look the same, you have one kid who's been screamed and yelled at by their parents and another kid who hasn't. Even though the outside of their body looks the same, I'm telling you, that brain is different. So we need to be very aware that sometimes we do things with our kids that we shouldn't be doing rather than worrying about, what am I doing? What am I doing? It's actually, what are you doing that maybe you shouldn't be doing? And that's what we're here to talk about. Okay. Now, the cortex starts growing, and the thing in this baby, coming to the baby's brain, is that this cortex is going to have both experience-expectant development, so all the genes will be producing new connections, unbelievably fast growth of the brain. Even if nothing, you're doing nothing. It grows and grows and grows and grows in that first 2 years of life. It's growing like mad. And you don't need to worry about that. You don't have to get all the things to grow. Just love your kid and be there, be present, and things work out fine. When the baby starts growing 2-3 years of age, essentially what's going to happen is this. Put your fingers over the top, and let's just talk about how this works. The back of the brain is mapping out the 3-dimensional world. So if you happen to have a baby who's blind, for example, the input from the fingers as they explore the world or they learn Braille will come into the back of the brain that for those of us with eyes allows us to see the 3-dimensional world. So that's really what those cortical maps are about, is seeing the 3-dimensional world or perceiving it anyway. It's an amazing thing. Even if I put you in a house and blindfolded you for a week, your fingers would take over the back of your brain that usually your eyes now, which don't have input because you're blindfolded, they can show that. So the back of the brain is for the 3-dimensional world. Okay, now as the brain develops in the first, let's say, 3 to 4 years of life, it's going to develop from the bottom up, as we saw in utero, and it's going to develop from the back forward. So the back is what you check out the three-dimensional world, the sound, and what you do with your body. And now as you move forward, we're going to come to these second to the last knuckles and the last knuckles, and this is the frontal lobe of the brain. So the frontal lobe of the brain is amazing. It has one area where you plan motor action, and so babies are just learning how to plan what they do with their bodies. It's very immature, of course, as it's going to be. They're going to learn to crawl, and then learn to, scoot around, and ultimately learn to walk and run and all sorts of things. And that's the motor area of the brain, this first area that plans for action and carries out action. But here's the most important part for parenting is from your last knuckles to your fingernails, take a look at that. That area is called the prefrontal cortex. So what's it called? Prefrontal cortex. And what the prefrontal cortex does is an absolutely amazing thing, both in your kid and in you. Because look where it is. Let's just look, for example, at the middle two fingernail areas. Okay? See where that is in your brain model? Now lift up the fingers and put it back down. This area of the brain is basically going to link different areas to each other. And the word for linking different areas to each other is called integration. So this area is profoundly integrative. So you have all these different areas of the brain. You got the brain stem, the limbic area with all its functions. You got all the different areas of the cortex. You got the social world going on. And this area is going to do just what those fancy skin cells are born to do. It's going to coordinate all this inner stuff with this outer stuff. And that's what the prefrontal cortex behind your forehead is all about. It's all about saying what's going on inside, what's going on outside, how do I coordinate and balance all this stuff happening? So it's pretty amazing. I'm just going to list off 9 functions that are proven to be outcomes of what this area of the brain does. And as we go through this list of 9, I'm going to ask you, how many of those would you like your spouse to have, your partner to have? How many of those would you like yourself to have? And how many of those would you like your child to have when they get to be about 25? Because this area keeps on growing and growing through adolescence. All right, you ready? Number 1, this area reaches down. Look where it is. You can see, lift it up and put it back down. While it's a part of the cortex, it reaches to the limbic area here. It reaches down to the brainstem, and it actually receives direct input from the body. So it's very much regulating all that stuff. So the number 1 is body regulation. It's the ultimate arbiter of how do I keep myself regulated. And remember we said, where does emotion come from? Remind me. Well, what else? The limbic system combined with the brainstem and the body. Excellent. So if you've got a part of the brain like the prefrontal cortex that's regulating the body, it's also regulating emotion, isn't it? See how that works? See why you need to know all the details? It's the body, the heart, the intestines, the muscles that's coming up through the vagus nerve and all sorts of other areas in the spinal cord, and it comes up to the brainstem, the limbic area. Well, the prefrontal cortex sits on top of that and is regulating the body itself. Isn't that amazing? So it's involved in emotion regulation, which is what body regulation is a part of. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, it's a part of what's called attuned communication. For someone to tune into someone else, you need this prefrontal cortex to lock in. I mean, you can take a moment and look at the person sitting next to you and just look at them and see if you can tune into that person. Go ahead, look at each other if you can, if you dare do that. Here, this person needs to be looked at too. You can look at me. All right. You can feel that. When you feel that when you tune into someone, that's your prefrontal region. It's designed to tune into the mind of another person. And it's also the same area used when you tune into yourself with mindfulness practices, for example. Okay, that's attuned communication, number 2. Number 3 is something called emotional balance. Emotional balance means emotions can get revved up, and so life has a lot of passion and vitality to it, but it doesn't get too revved up so it's chaotic, or too shut down so it's rigid. It's like a river of integration where optimal emotional balance comes when you integrate things, basically, And if you're not integrating things, that is, if you're not differentiating and linking, they get chaotic or they get rigid. And that's take-home message number 5 or 6, and where we are in the numbers, where when your child is getting chaotic or rigid, something is not integrated. If they're really young, like less than 24, you can help them get integrated by making sure you stay present and don't get thrown by their chaos or rigidity, right? And that's why Parenting from the Inside Out is a good book for you to start with, because it teaches you how to achieve that kind of parental presence. Okay, so that's number 3, emotional balance. Number 4 is something called response flexibility, which just means pausing before you act. Wouldn't that be amazing if everyone could do that? Like, don't just impulsively react, pause and reflect on what's going on. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's another person going through? What's the best choice for you to do? That's just being flexible, or I call it response flexibility. That's number 4. Number 5 is calming fear. The capacity for you to be frightened of something and then calm that fear and get on that airplane anyway. That means your prefrontal cortex is actually squirting inhibitory stuff down to the amygdala. So just review that. You've got the prefrontal cortex here in your fingernails. You got your amygdala, part of the limbic area that creates fear. And if you can squirt a little calming, what one of my patients called GABA goo, GABA is gamma aminobutyric acid, it calms the amygdala, that's what calms you down. And people who have all sorts of mood disorders or have trouble with fear have too little inhibitory fibers from this prefrontal area down to the limbic area. That's an example of a lack of integration. So that's number 5, soothing fear. Number 6 is insight into oneself, which means what's going on with me right now, what happened to me before in the past, and how do I want to be in the future? So it's a kind of mental time travel, is what a researcher named Endel Tolvin calls it. This is insight. It's kind of basically self-understanding. It's making a mindsight map, a map of your own mind, a mindsight map of me. Then number 7 is empathy, which has a lot of different aspects to it, including compassion as a form of empathy, really. But empathy, we're going to use the word here for how you make a mindsight map of another person. How do I take your perspective? How do I imagine what it's like to be you? How do I feel your feelings? Or if you're having a hard time, how do I imagine how I'm going to help you with kindness and a compassionate act? Or there's something called empathic joy. You're doing well, you've succeeded well, I'm really excited, right? And that's where the analogy of that candle comes in part. I'm happy when your wick is lit. It doesn't take anything away from my candle to have your candle lit up. But we live in a society where you're not supposed to have empathic joy. In fact, I've worked at high schools where the whole idea is blow out everybody else's wick. So when you apply to college, you can be the brightest candle in the bunch, and then they pick you because they're only picking one of you after all, aren't they? So someone else being lit up is just a threat. Because what you're supposed to do, right, is you're supposed to get into the most elite middle school. So you get into the most elite high school. So if you do, you can get into the most difficult to get into college. So if you're really lucky, you'll get into the most elite graveyard. And these kids have so much pressure. It's so painful. And if you go to my website, drdansiegel.com, go to resources, go to the videos, you'll see it's a very sad story. But at Palo Alto High School, across from Stanford University, you probably know this, that there were a number of high school students jumping in front of the train and killing themselves. And so the administrators called me up to do an intervention at the school. And the students interviewed me ahead of time, and then I met with the whole population of the school, the kids, the parents, the administrators, the teachers, and the camera was out there that the students had set up, and so people could stay confidential, but then you'll see me do this 2-hour talk for them. It's all about adolescent brain development, but the bottom line is, what I told them was that if you're raised to only think that the purpose in life is to achieve what understandably parents think is what you're supposed to do, like get some thing that's measurable, like a high GPA or a high SAT score, or get into the college that has the lowest percentage of acceptances. And parents believe even that that's going to guarantee anything, when actually the research shows it guarantees nothing. And you should see the parents' faces when I said it guarantees nothing. They go, what? I go, yeah, it guarantees nothing. That's what the research shows. But what they've done is they've robbed these children of the opportunity of developing an internal compass that will guide them the rest of their life. So when they don't get into the college that validates what their parents and their culture and even their peers and themselves think is the only measure of success, they feel like their life is over and they're 17 and they jump in front of the train. It's the biggest waste in the world. They even put guards there, and the kids are still climbing the fence and jump in front of the train. That's how desperate the situation is. So I say this to you because this issue of, having empathy and really understanding this has got to be across our whole culture. It's not just for this little baby growing up, but it starts there, you see? Knowing that I have an inside and you have an inside, that makes all the difference than just thinking there's a measure of success called a number, and if I get a high number, low number, whatever, then I'm okay. Well, it's just a recipe for literally disaster. Okay, so that's number 7. Number 8 is morality, which is, if insight is a mindset map of me and empathy is a mindset map of you, morality is a mindset map of we. It's one of the most underdeveloped senses we have, that we are actually part of an interconnected whole as a we. We with each other, we with nature, that you are actually a self that's bigger than just your body. So that's really what morality is based on, is I am part of this larger process. I belong to something bigger than a private self. So that's morality. That's number 8. And then number 9 is intuition, which is basically accessing the signals of your heart and the signals of your intestines, your heart brain and your gut brain. Literally have a different way of processing information and give you deep wisdom and intuition. It's not always right, but it needs to be tapped into. So I start the Brainstorm book with a very sad story. My favorite teacher in my psychiatry training was going to a movie with his wife, and a 17-year-old driving about 100 miles an hour on a surface street hit him head on and killed him. And I always thought, my kid was about 18 months old at the time, but I always thought if I could ever write something that would help adolescents not do that. That kid had crashed a car speeding on the same street 2 months earlier, and what did his parents do? Just get him a new car. I bet you that if that adolescent had had some of the exercises that you can do in the Brainstorm book, he'd have developed an internal compass. And when he got in his brand new sports car and he saw it could rev up to 180 miles an hour, and he says, my heart is telling me I don't think I should do this. My friends are saying, go for it, Billy, you can do it, go do it, do it. My gut says this isn't right. He goes, I don't care if my mom says don't drive fast. I don't care if the sign says 35 miles per hour because a cop put it up there. I don't care what those adults say because I'm an adolescent. I push against that. But my own heart and my own gut are telling me the right way to be. And I don't want to hurt anybody. That's an internal compass, and you see it growing right here. From the earliest days, you can start teaching a kid to pay attention to what are you feeling? What does your heart tell you? What does your intestine tell you? And yet very few parents do that. Schools almost never do that. And so kids become adolescents without any kind of guideline for this internal way of being. We've shown at UCLA the exact area in the brain, part of the prefrontal cortex, that develops when you have an internal compass. What does it do? It allows you to know your own emotional world better. It allows you to be more empathic with others. And it allows you to make more considerate decisions because you're having this other source of flow coming up from your body. It's called the insula, if you want to just know the name of it. Okay. Now, what's amazing is if you give the 4 S's, right? Being seen, let's do it together. Being seen, soothed, safe, and secure. you will develop, my field has shown, the first 8 of these 9, and we just haven't looked for intuition yet. That's a proven outcome of secure attachment. So if you take nothing else away from tonight's talk, if you just aim for those 4 S's, you're going to be doing great. Seriously, you're going to be doing great. And if you didn't get those 4 S's when you were a kid, read the brainstorm section on attachment, and it'll give you a really condensed guide, or read the Parenting from the Inside Out book, because people say, well, I didn't have it when I was a kid. This is horrible talk, because I can't go back to the past. Here's what the research shows. This is take-home point number 8 or 9 or whatever it is. The research shows the best predictor of whether your kids will have those 4 S's and have secure attachment, which predicts that they'll have these 8, at least, of these 9 integrative prefrontal functions, is not what happened to you. It's not. That's not what it predicts it. It's how you've made sense of what happened to you. Now, that is probably the most important finding in all of research for the entire process of parenting. So let me repeat that. The best predictor of whether or not your child will have a secure attachment with you, and secure attachment gives them 8 of those 9 integrative functions we just reviewed, is how you've made sense of your life. So let's say you didn't have the experience of being seen. Let's say you didn't have the experience of being soothed. Let's say you didn't have the experience of being safe. Let's say your parents were terrifying to you. You could have even been abused or neglected, or more subtly, just they were terrifying in other ways, coming home drunk or beating each other up or whatever. Horrible things, what's called adverse childhood experiences. Like that. And then you've taken the time to reflect on how those experiences you did have had a negative impact on you, a positive impact on you, a neutral impact, whatever. You look at the impact it had on your development. You look at the impact on what it does to you now as an adult, how it shapes your parenting. That's hard work. Why is it hard work? Because when we were kids, we were really vulnerable. We were really dependent on people. Now, if those people called our caregivers, our attachment figures, our parents, grandparents, whoever they were, if they treated us well, okay, then this topic is really boring for you, I'm sure. But for many of us, almost a half, so 45%, of the non-clinical U.S. population, somewhere between 35 and 45%, we didn't have such great parenting experiences. It's called insecure attachment. That's a lot. That's like 150 million people in this country. So you're not alone if that's your case. Certainly wasn't my case. The great, great, great news is that whatever impairments to the growth of your brain happened in subtle or not so subtle ways, because ultimately what secure attachment does, it makes this whole brain integrated. And what studies have shown of severe blockages to secure attachment called abuse and neglect, it impairs the growth of integrative fibers in the brain. The good news is research is very clear. You can grow integrative fibers throughout the lifespan. So, what does the making sense process do? It allows, let's say, using me as an example, I would say, how did my past affect me? What was my childhood like? How did my experience with my parents influence me? I can't change what happened. So a lot of people say, well, I can't change what happened, so why bother looking? That's painful stuff. Man, don't make me do this. This is dumb. They're wrong. The reason to look at it is because the way your brain processes things in memory now, by the making sense process, can actually transform the structure of your own brain. You can show that when people do the making sense process, they develop these 9 functions. So if you're sitting there going, man, I wish I had those 9 functions, you can. My field is attachment research, but another one of my fields is called mindfulness research. And what we've able to show, the whole field of mindfulness work, is these 9 functions are exactly the functions that grow when you not just make sense of your life in terms of autobiographical reflection, but you develop presence, which you can do with mindfulness training. You train your mind to focus attention, to have opening of awareness called presence, to have kind intention toward yourself. Because a lot of what happens to people who experience insecure attachment, which is, again, 35 to 45% of us in this room. If this is the non-clinical population, that's a lot of us in this room. What it means is that when you make sense, you have to face something like your vulnerability. I used to be a little kid dependent on others who were not dependable. It was really painful. I was very lonely would be one example. I was very confused would be another example. I was really scared out of my mind would be another example. I had a lot of pain, sexually, physically, emotionally, verbally. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Now, the reason to go and check that out in your own reflections is because you can take what is impairment to integration when you haven't made sense of that stuff, and you can then integrate yourself, literally. You can grow these same integrative fibers that research independently has shown are compromised with severe suboptimal attachment. Mindfulness studies show those exact same fibers grow. It's absolutely amazing. Independent fields. So let me share with you one thing just to get a feeling for it. You know, you got this brain that we've now put all together, and we're saying this prefrontal area along with the hippocampus and the corpus callosum that links the left and right together. The hippocampus is in the limbic area. These are all very integrative regions. There's also something called, it's the word connect, with the letters O-M-E at the end, the connectome. Severe compromises to secure attachment lead to impairments in all 4 of those integrative parts of the brain. That is, let's say it together, the corpus callosum connects left and right, the hippocampus that links all the memories stuff together, the prefrontal cortex, which is basically creating these 9 functions because it links the cortex, the limbic area, the brainstem, the body, and the social world together. 5 energy and information flow sources that are differentiated are linked with this prefrontal cortex behind your forehead. It's awesome. And then the connectome. Those are 4 ways you can grow your brain. And if you supply the 4 S's, you'll get your kid's brain to become integrated. That's what research shows. It's absolutely amazing. An integrated brain is a regulated brain. It's that simple. Take-home message number 10. You do this work, and you've learned exactly how to get your kid's brain to become integrated. It's not a mystery. It's not a mystery. Now, it may be hard work, because let me show you what can happen, just as one example. Think about that list of 9 functions, okay? Body regulation, attuning to yourself or others, tuned communication, emotional balance, response flexibility, soothing fear, insight, empathy, morality, and intuition, okay? Let me just check it out for you. How many of you would like maybe all 9 of those for yourself? Raise your hand. Okay, great. How many of you would like your partner, your spouse, to have those 9? Good. How many of you would like your kid to have those? Great. Okay. We know how to do that. Schools can help kids develop this. If you're running a school, you can teach these skills. That's why I wrote the Brainstorm book. You can teach kids how to do this in schools. This is not a mystery, okay? This is very, very available in science if you go through those incredibly boring science papers. But once you do that and you find out what's useful about them, you can say that basically integration is the basis of health. And when you're not integrated, you go to chaos or rigidity. Now watch this. Everyone take your hand model. Okay, we know the 9 functions that come when this whole thing is being integrated, right? Okay, now you don't have to look at each other. I'll be the one who fesses up. But how many of you in your role as a parent have ever done this, where you flip your lid and you start acting without maybe 1, 2, or maybe all 9 of those functions? Anyone want to fess up to that? Me too. Even though I was a National Institute of Mental Health Research Fellow for attachment. Even though I was a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. I was like flipping my lid. I thought I was a monster or nuts or a combo of those two or something. Oh my gosh. So I had to try to figure this out. Well, here's the deal. If you've had a difficult childhood or even just a difficult day, you can flip your lid. And when you flip your lid, those 9 functions are gone. You know what I'm talking about. And you know how it works. Your kid starts pushing on that exact button that is the very button you shouldn't have pushed at that time of day. And they're doing this or doing this. In my case, it's being not responded to because I feel invisible, because that's what my childhood was about. So that's my hot button, right? So I say to my kids, do this or that. They don't do it. I said, well, do this. No, I said do that. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. They don't do it. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a child psychiatrist. I know about parenting. I said do this. No, they don't do it. And before I know it, okay, my brainstem is saying, this is bad stuff. But I don't hear that. My limbic area says, this is really, really bad. You're invisible again, man. That is terrible. And the brainstem and the limbic area getting together, they're like a volcano, and they're starting to go like this. Oh, my God, and bam! You know what I'm talking about. Everyone's going, yeah, I know. So even though you tried to hold your stuff together, bam, it happens that fast. You know what I'm talking about. You thought you were doing fine parenting. Yes, I am. Bam, and now you're acting like another human being, which even by itself is terrifying, but you know the things you say and do in those states with your hands, put them behind your back if you can, are just not right. No one wants to talk about it because you don't want to get reported to the authorities. But I can talk about it because I am the authorities. So for real, I'm just actually serious about that. So the thing that's great about doing a parenting meeting like this is we can just own up to it. Because here's the problem. When you flipped your lid, it's hard to get it back closed down. And your kid remains terrified. And then when you finally get it back down and you go to try to make a repair, because you heard Dan say make a repair, but you're not really all together, you go, oh, listen, and they still ignore you, bam, you fly off again, and now it's even worse. You know what I'm talking about, right? So this is not good. Then what can happen is any of us who've had insecure attachment can have an emotion that's rarely talked about. From an attachment point of view, it's called shame. And shame is actually created when we don't have our attachment needs met. And shame is this really painful, heavy feeling in your chest. It's a nauseous feeling in your belly. When it gets really activated, you turn your eye gaze away, and then your cortex comes up with a belief, I am defective. Not that I'm guilty and have done a bad behavior that I could correct, but I am damaged goods. Everybody with me? So shame is associated with helplessness and hopelessness and despair because you can't repair a fundamentally fractured self that deep inside you believe is true. So now that shame goes underground because you can't function with shame. So you decide, I'll go and do this profession or that profession, whatever, and I'm going to prove myself worthy, and you get this amount of money or that big house or this job, or in my case, I'm in Hollywood, this award or that award, meaning my patients, and they still feel terrible because the issue isn't your accomplishments or your intelligence or your talent or nothing like that. The issue is your childhood. And when people have avoided, understandably, making sense of the past, the shame stays there underground. And what happens when you flip your lid is you're ashamed of what you did, because what you did was not something that was good. That's true. One time I was teaching a workshop when I was teaching about the hand model of the brain. The next day I was dropping my daughter off at preschool, and Mary Hartzell, the preschool director, had me do this workshop. And I dropped my daughter off, and one of the moms said, Dan, I need to talk to you. I said, yeah, what's that? She goes, last night we had at the workshop, you're talking about flipping your lid. I said, yeah. She goes, I can't tell you how useful that was. I said, why was that useful? She goes, I had a very difficult childhood, so I understand you're saying that my chance of flipping my lid is more likely, can happen to anybody, but just more likely because I had a difficult childhood? I said, yeah. It's more likely when I go there, I'll be more intense about it? Yeah. I'll stay there longer? Yeah. It'll be harder to get back? Yeah. Be more difficult to make a repair because of the shame? I said, yeah. She goes, well, what you said told me that it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility because you showed me the brain model. And I went, oh my God, that is so beautiful. She said, all my life I've been screaming at my daughter, all her life. She was 3.5. Our kids were 3.5 together in school. And I said to myself, oh, she won't remember this because she's too young, which is not true. Or I'm a monster and I can't tell anyone about it, which is also not true. She's just a human being. And what she did from that moment onward was realize that it's not her fault. So instead of beating herself up for what she was doing, she could actually now take responsibility and let go of beating herself up. Isn't that amazing what she said? All by looking at the brain model, which is why I've been teaching you guys about this. So flipping your lid is what any of us can do, but it's our responsibility to bring ourselves back into an integrated way of being, because when you flipped your lid, integration has stopped. These separate areas just function on their own. To get those 9 functions, you need them all coordinated and balanced. When you flipped your lid, you've lost the coordination and balance. You're like a different person, aren't you? You know what I'm talking about. So what she taught me was that when parents and even kids learn about this, you say, okay, I'm going to make a repair. And repair. If I said it the rest of the evening, which I only have 5 more minutes, so I could say it and it wouldn't even be enough. Because here's the deal about repair. You bring yourself back together, and then you go make a reconnection with your child. And you say, you know something? 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, 5 days ago, in one case, I had someone say it was 15 years ago. It was the most amazing family sessions I had. Someone who came back and realized they had done this to their adult child and just wanted to own up to it. That's great that they didn't. Now, you want to not wait 15 years, so you make a repair. You go back and make a repair. The first repair you need to make is with yourself. And here's another take-home point. The feeling of shame has profound conviction that you are defective. That conviction has no relationship to its accuracy. We are good inside, and relationships make us feel that we're bad. That's something we learned in our own childhood. You have the responsibility for your own well-being to look for those areas of shame and heal them in yourself. That's what making sense of your life involves. I was vulnerable. A vulnerable child who has experience-expectant brain circuitry that doesn't get soothed or seen or safe gets the emotional response of shame that gets embedded in my neural firing patterns. They are so strong, those firing patterns, that all I do is believe it's true. But it's so painful, it makes me feel so helpless and despair, I shove it beneath awareness. I carry out my life trying to prove I'm great or whatever like that. Or as one patient said in all his relationships that kept on failing, I couldn't excuse someone if they loved me. And I said, what? He said, I couldn't excuse him if this woman loved me. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you know what I mean. I mean, first of all, if she loves me and I love her, then it's really dangerous because she might leave me one day and I don't want to be hurt again, so I'm going to leave her first. Or if she loves me, I realize she's really stupid and I don't want to be with someone stupid. I said, what do you mean she's stupid? She goes, well, because I'm a piece of crap. So obviously she's so stupid that she would love a piece of crap. Why would I want to be with a person who would love a piece of crap? I'm leaving her now. This is the kind of thing. It's like Woody Allen's, quoting of Groucho Marx. Why would I be a member of a club that would have me as a member? I mean, I just wouldn't do it. That's shame. So, the healing starts with yourself. That's what making sense of your life means. In this new book, The Yes Brain, what we do is we give you the steps to actually, if you've done parenting from the inside out or whole brain child or whatever, but you've come to this understanding that what you bring to the table is really important, then in a yes brain approach, what you're doing is you're saying, I can actually have a yes brain approach, meaning a receptive state that I can take with me in my parenting, right? Now, a yes state is where this brain becomes profoundly integrative. And you can create that yes approach even tonight. If you go home and you start writing in a journal that's saying, I want to make sense of my childhood or whatever, and that's great. You need to realize this brain can get into a yes state where you say, I'm going to realize what Dan said. I'm going to remember shame is a learned emotional feeling that has the conviction that I'm defective. The conviction is not related to its accuracy. So even though I believe I'm defective, that could be an erroneous belief. Everybody with me on that? Okay. This is your pathway to the yes brain state where you say, okay, so even though if I feel I'm a piece of crap, I'm actually not. At least I can start thinking that way. You write in journals about that. You say hello to the shame. We all have different brain states we can get into. The no state, in contrast to a yes brain state, the no brain state basically is very reactive. It's where the brainstem gets activated with fight, flight, and freeze and faint. And it's doing all these things with the limbic area, and it's throwing these signals up saying, this is horrible, this is terrible, run, this is bad. You can realize you can get in that reactive no brain state, and that's often what flipping your lid is about, right? You're just human. That's what this means. But like that wonderful mom said to me that morning, this is not your fault. But I hope tonight is making you realize it is both your responsibility and your opportunity. The question is, do you love your child enough to start making sense of your own life so you can bring presence to them? Because that's, I don't mean with a T, I mean with a C-E, parental presence to them so that you are actually available so that they can be seen with clear eyes from you, right? And you give up these false objectives we have for kids. Get into the most elite this and most elite that because I feel like a piece of crap, but at least you'll prove I'm okay. Seriously. Think about what kind of burden that places on a child to prove you're okay, and all they're trying to do is just make in this incredibly crazy world we live in, you know? So let the home life they have with you not be crazy like the world outside. Give them a solid, safe haven where you've done your work of making sense, right? And if you say, well, I don't know how to do that, I'm giving you the pathway to do it. You can go to Parenting from the Inside Out. It's a big hug. That book is one big hug that Mary Hartzell and I wrote. And you do that book, then Tina Bryson and I, my student, now my colleague, you have these other things, including the Yes Brain, which says, okay, I can have parental presence so that I'm here to actually see who my child really is. And let me tell you, it sounds subtle, and you may say, what did he say to do? But you start working on this dropping beneath your expectations, dropping beneath your shame, because here's the key thing. And for the clinicians in the room who were there this morning, I'm going to make a reference to something just so they can follow, but deep inside of every one of us, there is what's called receptive awareness. For the clinicians, they heard a physics view of this. It's called the sea of potential, this plane of possibility. Okay? Nothing can take that away from you. If you tonight go do this practice we have on our website called the Wheel of Awareness, it teaches you how to get to the hub of this wheel. And in this book called Aware, which I have written to kind of go deeply into this issue, it'll teach you step by step how to do that. The point is that when you drop into the hub of this wheel, which this practice teaches you to do, you go beneath all the stuff on the rim, which includes feelings like shame. So for the clinicians, you're dropping into that plane of possibility where all those plateaus and peaks that were learned have imprisoned you in a belief you're defective, but you're actually not defective. When you drop down to pure awareness, to receptive awareness, which there are techniques to teach you how to do, your brain becomes integrated. And from that integrated place, that yes brain state, you look over to something on the rim, which would be these plateaus and peaks for the clinicians. You look over to this rim and you go, look at that. There's a feeling of shame. There's a thought in my head, I'm a piece of crap. There's my belief my child should be a football player. Here's all these beliefs. But when I drop into presence, because presence is what comes from the hub, that's the plane of possibility, you drop to that place and no kind of abuse or neglect or anything can ever take that away from you. That is a diamond in the rough. That is your center that nothing can take away. What gets in the way of you accessing it are these beliefs that you have. And for some people, dropping into that hub is so spacious, it's just filled with freedom, it's filled with joy, it's filled with love. It actually freaks people out because they've never felt so much pure energy before. So sometimes you have to go slow because that openness can be, especially if you had a difficult childhood, you want to cling on to something like, it's better that I know I'm defective than actually enter this open state of just saying, wow, I'm ready to connect with other people. I can't control that, but I can love them. Right? So part of that journey is to feel how you're doing with just letting go of control and dropping into presence. And that's something you can learn to do. Now, when you start doing that, and this is what I'm going to close with, here's the amazing thing, and Bianca was saying this earlier, if you think about candles, right? These rigid beliefs we have, the belief like the self is just in the body, that's just like the wax of your candle, right? You are more than just the wax. You're the flame, right? And you can turn to your left, right. You can light someone up. But here's the key thing. When you start living from a place of light and love and presence like that, which is possible to learn to do, it's a skill. Living with presence is a skill you can absolutely learn to do. And when you do that, what naturally arises toward your inner experience and what naturally arises in the brain, and studies have shown this, and what naturally arises in your relationship experience, so relationships have this, the brain has this, your inner mental experience has this, is kindness and compassion. That's what presence allows to happen. That's the natural state of integration. Integration made visible is kindness and compassion. And whether you look at the relational side of it in your attachment relationship, or you look at it from a brain point of view, literally the brain has integrated when it's kind and compassionate, or you look at it in your own mental experience and the gentleness you can have, as that woman said, I can realize it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. All those ways are how we can together make this a kinder and more compassionate world for our kids at home, for our adolescents who grow into the world, and for the larger communities in which we live. Thank you so much for your attention.